Holy smokes, gang, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're down to 6. Should save this where it is. We're down to 6 of these things. What to do next? What to do next? Hazel's coming. Hi, Hazel. I don't know. I just did monstrous beasts, so let's do war beasts and get it over with. All right, clear all these out, and then we'll explain what we're doing here. If you haven't seen any of these videos so far, I don't know how you got this far in the series, but hey, welcome. We're doing a tier list of every unit of a certain class. For this one, we're doing like war beasts, right? So dogs and various monsters, but generally not ridden by anything and generally not very sentient. We do rank them by how strong they are in a vacuum, not with any like campaign technologies or specific lord effects that could buff them up, because that just makes the conversation really confusing and annoying, where it's like, oh, for Arkan the Black, crypt ghouls are really good, but for Manfred they're not, so I put them in C or S depending on what campaign you're playing. It's not useful information for anybody, so I'm just ranking them as they are on their own when they spawn into a map all by themselves. Right. Let's do this. I do focus on gold values as a metric of how intense something should be or how elite something should be. Because if you didn't go by gold, you would just go by their raw stats, and without factoring in their cost, everything with high stats and high cost would be S tier because it has the most stats, and everything with the least stats would be D tier. But cost factors in some things, like feral cold ones cost... War Beast isn't great because all these guys are pretty cheap, but like... I don't know. Yeah, they're all pretty similar. Never mind. This is a bad unit category to make that example because they all cost similar things. But like in the cavalry thing, it's like comparing silver helms and dragon princes. I mean, yeah, dragon princes have higher stats, but you can afford almost 2 silver helms to 1 dragon prince. So I don't know. Whatever. I'm mixing my metaphors. Let's get on with it. War beasts. How strong are you? How good are you? Feral cold ones. C tier. They took a lot of nerfs. They deserved a lot of nerfs. They used to be OP. Now I think they're actually rather bad. Low leadership, easily rampaged, units with low melee stats. They do have armor piercing, which is the only thing that makes them any good. But, I don't know. They're a little overpriced for what they do right now, and they're pretty terrible at chasing down infantry or killing infantry. So they're only good at helping with other cavalry fights. And that's about it. They don't have the highest stats to get through armored infantry, because armored infantry usually have high enough melee defense to just stay alive. They're not having a great time. Feral cold ones are currently pretty whatever. Harpies. B. Harpies are fine. Bats with stats. Aerial units that can harass other aerial units or dive down onto archers. They don't really want to fight any infantry. They don't really want to fight any cavalry or anything like that. But they do like preying on helpless things or giving you a little bit of air cover. So harpies are just flying dogs that are a nuisance. Speaking of dogs, wolf rats. Both poison and armor-piercing wolf rats are A tier. Some of the highest damage dog units in the entire game. They are only limited by their crazy low leadership, which is a balanced choice. That is not something I'm complaining about. It is just factual. If you keep them in the fight, wolf rats do insane damage and do so much work for you. If you let them rout, they suck and die. But when they do that damage, they do so much damage that they're definitely worth taking, and they do have a magic damage armor-piercing variant or a poison variant. I always take the poison variant, but in case in the future there's a patch that makes the armor-piercing one a little bit better, maybe you want to take that too. Wolf rats are just great. They beat most other dog units 1v1. War Lions of Crace. B. War Lions of Crace, not great at chasing stuff down, but they are really good at slamming into front lines and getting a bunch of impact damage and pushing through, or they're good at countering heavy cavalry that are trying to penetrate your back line. So they're good for those two things. Pretty bad at chasing down other units, not very good at killing single entities either. So War Lions do have their limits, but they're a little beefier as far as the war beasts go, and they offer something the high elves need, so they deserve B tier. Scurvy dogs, D tier. Scurvy dogs are terrible. Scurvy dogs are the worst thing I've ever seen. Scurvy dogs and the other vampire counts dogs, which I think are down here, it's dire wolves. So yeah, I'm just gonna grab and put them down here. They are dogs. Do the vampire counts need dogs? Yes. If the vampire counts had access to any other dog, would they take it over these two? Yes. Scurvy dogs and dire wolves are terrible. Unbreakable is the only good thing about them. They do okay at chasing stuff down. They take forever to kill anything, it feels like. But if archers aren't already routing, depending on the archer, like wood elf archers and high elf archers will just beat up scurvy dogs and dire wolves in melee. It's pretty abysmal. They have to like get peasant archers of Bretonnia to actually kill something. Even then, they'll still take some damage. And then they die in one hit from cavalry. They're still pretty expensive. They're 500 gold apiece, where wolf rats are 550 and so much better. Dire wolves and scurvy dogs are just terrible units. They are garbage. They only exist because their roster needs something like them, and their rosters have a ton of healing to just throw at them and keep them in the fight. Even then, these guys usually fade away. Scurvy dogs and dire wolves, both of you can go die. I guess you already did. Carrion. I'll go with B or A. I'll put them in B. Yeah, B. Flying blockers with high melee defense, very cheap at 380 gold. They don't go higher because they don't do any damage whatsoever, and I honestly feel like that melee defense doesn't help them that often for some reason. Like, it's high, but I still feel like I can easily kill Carrion whenever I need to. So Carrion are only useful at driving off something that's already routing or distracting ranged units for just a couple seconds to let your front line do something without getting shot, but then your Carrion are going to die. They're incredibly cheap. You just throw them in to cause distraction. That's really it. So they get into B tier for being a distraction, but they can't go any higher until they start doing some damage or they're tankier. They're fine. Fellbats, on the other hand, are back in D tier. Fellbats are garbage. Flyers you need if you need to distract something in the air or muck up a backline for like a hot second, but bats are incredibly fragile and still like 375 gold, so not cheap either. Just kind of terrible. Just terrible. Not cheap enough to be the chaff that they are, but not enough damage to be a real pursuit unit. Bats just kind of suck. I wish that I personally would make them cheaper, make them like 250, 300 gold flat or something like that, and just make them terrible. Because you don't want, well, I don't want bats that actually do damage. That feels weird. Like, I'm a thematic person, so when I see a bat flying at one of my other units in Total Warhammer, I'm like, oh, that should annoy my unit, but not do that much damage. So you want it to be priced that way, like a flying Skaven slave. Not like, let's make them just rip people limb from limb, and then you're like, wow, my state troops just got ripped apart by little bats. That's cool. Feels good. So, yeah, they're fine. Chaos Warhounds, poisoned or not. The capacity to pay 50 extra gold to get poisoned is quite nice. Chaos Warhounds do a lot of damage. They are very, very fast. Not good against anything with armor. Great at chasing down things. Good at killing archers. Chaos Warhounds are B tier. Bye. Sorry, saying bye to my wife. Chaos Warhounds are my metric for what makes a B tier dog. Like, for the rest of this list, just think how I feel about Chaos Warhounds. I think wolf rats are better. A tier. I think harpies are about as good in a different function. B. I think feral cold ones are worse. C. These are my middle of the road. This is the metric I base all of dogs off of, and it's for a reason. They are fine. Norscan Warhound's going to fall down to C. Don't have poison variant of other dogs, otherwise they are statistically very similar. Norscan Warhounds are just kind of slightly underwhelming, but not oppressively so. They're okay. Norscan Ice Wolves are our first S tier dog. With their special slow that they use and their large model size, this is one of the first dog type units that isn't weak to cavalry just charging them and killing them on impact. Ice Wolves with their large size don't get trampled nearly as easily, so they can take cavalry charges easier. Their little support function is that they often just slow down heavy cavalry and allow other damaging forces to catch up to them while not being easy to dispatch either. So kind of like a real hunting dog, they really help the damage dealers catch up to whatever it is they're trying to catch and lock their jaws on and don't let go. They're also really good at fighting other dogs. They're one of the only dogs that can beat wolf rats 1v1. And they're not that much more expensive either, honestly, than wolf rats or even other basic dogs. Norscan Ice Wolf meta has been keeping Norsco afloat along with skin wolves for quite a while. Night Goblin Squig Hoppers, C tier for me personally. Price similar to the War Lion of Krace. They do similar things to the War Lion of Krace, but I feel like the War Lions are a little tankier while doing it and do a little bit more damage. Night Goblin Squig Hoppers are just a armor-piercing disruption piece. Good against, well, I wouldn't say good. Decent against heavy cav. Good at breaking through front lines, especially armored infantry front lines. So they're good layered on top of your own guys. If you treat them like a cavalry piece, though, and they just off on their own, they'll die to pretty much any cavalry that charges them. So they're pretty squishy in that aspect. Easy to shoot, too. So just a little worse than the War Lions. Because War Lions, I think I forgot to mention it, but they have missile resistance from their Lion's Pelt. The Night Goblin Squig Hoppers just feel a lot squishier to missiles than the War Lions do. Basic squigs are going to go in B. For a cheaper price point, they do a lot of what you want the Night Goblin Squig Hoppers to do. Good armor-piercing anti-infantry damage that you can just use to bust through a front line. Do decently if you can muck heavy cav in them as well. Just their armor-piercing will do enough. And they have a leadership buff if they get into melee, so once you get there, they should stick for a little bit. Squigs are just cheaper for doing about the same as Night Goblin Squig Hoppers. So, yeah, they're nice. We have Harpies again for a different roster or something. Yes, so I'm going to just take those off. Chaos Warhounds again. Take those off. Razor Gore Herds. Razor Gore Herds go in A tier. A really good source of armor piercing for only 600 gold, but it is their mass that gets them in here. Squigs and Squig Hoppers have, you know, armor piercing as well, and they have mass as well, but Razor Gores are straight up like you know those anti-tank hedgehog things that you put on like beaches when you're worried about an amphibious landing? These are that can move. Cavalry cannot get past these guys at all. They have to kill every single one before they can get out of there. So Razor Gore Herds are very good at that. Great at taking down chariots, cavalry, weapons teams. They're pretty abysmal at chasing off something that's routing. Like, they just don't do a lot of damage to stuff that's running away from them. They'll kind of just knock it around a lot and take forever to come back to the fight. So you'd want to give other war beasts the job of chasing down stuff that's already routing, but Razor Gores themselves are really good at fighting stuff that is still in the game. Razor Gores are great. The only thing you have to watch out for is not letting them just get caught in basic infantry and fighting basic infantry for a while. That's not what they're there for. They need to kill things that are more expensive than them. It's like heavy cav and stuff, but they can even surround single entity characters pretty well and get a lot of damage out too. Razor Gores are solid. Screamers of Tzeentch, I'm going to put in C tier. A flying, armor-piercing, anti-large, monstrous unit. I feel like they should be better than they are. They were really good on Game 3 release, but they've taken several nerfs, and now they're just a little too squishy and don't do enough damage for what I want them to do. But you can use them to rear charge enemy heavy cavalry that's already engaged with something else, and they get okay damage. But that is really the only situation I've had these guys do good. They're pretty bad against single entities. They're terrible at chasing stuff down. They're not even that fast, so a lot of stuff can actually outrun them and get to safety. They're bad at killing archers. They're bad at killing front lines. So just too niche, just too specific, and not cheap enough to be like, well, fire and forget, whatever. I paid 350 gold for this. It's like, no, they're 700, so I don't know. I've soured on Screamers. I don't think they're that good. Chaos Furies of Tzeentch are going to go in D tier. Hot take, before I get into any of my Furies, I am much less of a Fury fan than a lot of the community is. For me, those things are really expensive and insanely squishy and just die instantaneously. Whenever my opponent brings Furies against me and I'm the player playing against Furies, I'm like, oh, cool. I never see Furies and go, ah, crap. I have to deal with those. It's always like, yeah, this is fine. So I don't know. I don't think Furies are that good before I get into this. So here we go. Tzeentch Furies have barriers, which is cute, but Furies are so crazy squishy and their leadership is so low that the barriers don't really help them. Your Furies are only going one direction. They're going to get into one fight and then they're going to either win it or die. So Chaos Furies of Tzeentch almost never get a charge of their shields back. Like, you can't cycle charge them with barriers very well. They're just going to die. When they land, they're crazy weak to everything. In the air, they're weak to ranged units. They're pretty expensive for what they do. I think Furies are generally not that good, and Tzeentch Furies are one of the worst of them. Slaanesh Furies get all the way up to B tier because they're armor piercing. Slaanesh Furies have a niche, at least, that they fill. They can rear charge cavalry like Screamers, but I feel like they get the damage out much quicker on enemy cavalry that they rear charge. And they can jump on elite infantry or elite archers that usually have some armor to defend themselves and still get good damage out. That only gets them up to B. I still think these things are very expensive and crazy squishy, so you need to be super careful with the engagements you pick for them, and then it's kind of a one-way trip. But at least they have armor piercing. That does make them B as this like hyper elite dive bombing assassin type unit. Sabertusk packs back up into the A tiers. High weapon strength, low price point, extremely high mass. Very, very good stuff for the Sabertooth packs. Good at mucking up cavalry, stopping them in place. Still good at running down infantry. They have a little bit of the Razor Gore problem of knocking infantry over when they're trying to chase them around, but they just tend to kill more models than the Razor Gores do, and they're a little cheaper than the Razor Gores. But Sabertooth packs are fantastic. They're only kept out of S tier by not having true armor piercing and Rampage. Rampage is rough when you're trying to control them. Rotflies, D tier. Rotflies are abysmal. Expensive, squishy, don't deal any damage. They have no purpose. They are currently objectively garbage. Next topic. Plague Toads, C. Plague Toads are almost as bad as Rotflies, but they have one niche: breaking up front lines and shoving people everywhere. I love Plague Toads when I'm fighting as Nurgle against something with a bunch of ranged units or armored front lines, because then they just run in there and start knocking infantry all over the place and disrupting things, and it makes it very hard for the box to hold cohesion, and usually your Forsaken or Plague Bearers can get a bunch of damage out while the Plague Toads just distract and be a nuisance for only 650 gold. It's not crazy cheap, but it's also not that expensive for the disruption you're getting. They're still in C tier. They're not even in B, but they're out of D for that reason. They're good at knocking stuff around. Chaos Furies of Nurgle back in D. Chaos Furies of Nurgle back in D tier. Their whole marked by Nurgle thing just gives them slightly more melee defense, which, cool, you're one of the squishiest units in the entire game, so slightly more melee defense definitely fixes your problem. Oh, you still died instantly and you still cost 650 gold. Never mind, you suck. You don't even do good damage. Why bother making a one-shot fire and forget unit have slightly more melee defense? It's still a one-shot fire and forget unit. It's just going to die instantly. Ugh, terrible. Hounds of Corn. B or C? C. I don't know. These guys are taking too many nerfs. They're a little more expensive than Plague Toads. They're kind of meant to be dogs, but then I feel like my Hounds take forever to kill anything that's running away. But they're 150 gold more expensive than the Razor Gore, and there are 250 more gold more expensive than the Sabertooth packs, and they perform about as well as either of those units in a dedicated fight. They do pretty badly against heavy cav. They do okay against light infantry. They do pretty okay against light cavalry. And then they're demonic, so if they get low at all, they'll just crumble away into nothingness. They're not that good at chasing things down. They're just kind of mediocre. Sorry, Hounds. You're in C. Chaos Warhounds of Corn, back up to A. Cheap enough at 450 gold, but they have very, very high DPS. Are 100 gold cheaper than a Wolf Rat? Comparable on damage, just have a little less utility because the Wolf Rats have either their armor-piercing magic variant or poison variant. These guys are just base. Either way, they don't have poison and all that stuff. But they do have very, very high damage output if you get them onto lightly armored archers, or you're getting them to chase skirmish cav with you, or you're running stuff down. They're fantastic at all those things. Chaos Warhounds of Corn have a lot of damage, and I often honestly find them more useful than the Hounds. They are weak to cavalry charges, though, since they're light armor and dog size, so don't let them run into cav all alone. Chaos Furies of Corn, out of D tier, not quite in B tier. I think they are in C. Not armor piercing, but they do have a higher weapon strength than other Chaos Fury variants. So better against non-armored targets than the other Furies are. A lot more damage output they can do, and they usually have a little better leadership because they'll usually be winning melee combat, which makes them harder to demonic instability crumble. Still not quite up into B tier with the Slanesh one, just because the Slanesh one can sometimes really surprise heavy cav or expensive things. Generally, the Corn ones have to dive less expensive things because usually the more expensive something is, the more chance it has armor, which would really mess up this guy's day. Still a Chaos Fury, still gonna die instantaneously and take 650 gold to the grave with him when he demonic instability crumbles. So he's in C, but he's out of D. Onyx Crowman back in B. They were overpowered on the Shadows of Change DLC, but then they got toned down a lot, and demonic instability crumbling, taking them out, is pretty brutal. So if they get low at all, they'll just knock themselves out of the game. Good flyers, though. Very good flyers. Do a lot of damage for flyers. They're more expensive than the other flyers so far in B tier. So they are more expensive. You would expect them to do a little bit more, and they do. They're solid. Their teeny tiny profiles make them hard to shoot out of the sky, but lack of any significant armor piercing does make them just focused on killing just lightly armored, usually infantry. They want to avoid cavalry and heavy cav at all costs. Things in the Woods, I think they get a bad rap. I honestly think they are still A tier after their cost nerfs and some other nerfs they received since the Shadows of Change DLC. Again, that was pretty pay to win back in the day. So they have taken some nerfs since then. but they are still good armor-piercing war beasts, great at breaking through a front line like the Warhounds of Christ, but they're also really good at taking down chariots and cavalry. I guess the Warlions are similar to that, but I feel like the Things in the Woods are just better at doing it. So I really like the Things in the Woods. Their super low profile makes it hard for archers to hit them, making them pseudo-tanky to ranged fire, and a lot of handgun-type units can't even see them. I feel like Things in the Woods are just great, and they perform really well against cavalry, decently high leadership. They're good lads. And finally, Blood Vultures. Blood Vultures are weird. I want to like them more than I do, but I'm actually going to put them in C tier. I feel like Blood Vultures just have too low of leadership so that they rout instantaneously. And I know they can get leadership by other stuff dying near them, but usually they're the first ones to do the dying. Like, I'll wait for the engagement, and then ogres will engage, Blood Vultures will jump in second. But even then, they're still so squishy and leadership so low, they're going to rout before anybody else really does the dying. So, I don't know. Blood Vultures are just underwhelming to me. They're relatively cheap. They're fine, but there's other things I would rather take than them, and you don't even see them that much anymore. So I think they're C tier. I could see an argument for B. I cannot see them in D, and I cannot see them in A. So it's either B or C, but I'm going to put them in C for now. And yeah, I honestly just make these lists as I go. I didn't plan this out ahead of time. It's interesting that I think this is the first list with only one thing in S tier, and it's the Norscan Ice Wolf. But I honestly, looking at it, I don't see anything else I would put up there. So yeah, Norscan Ice Wolf, standalone S tier. And that is the War Beast and Dog tier list.
Roar. Subscribe, yes, yes.